What are the government policies were maintained even when the government changes?
I think there are three fundamental things that won't change in South Africa regardless of which government is in power. The first is the Constitution itself, which was agreed to by all parties in 1996 at the beginning of South Africa's democratic transition from apartheid to a full democracy. Although the governing party has had a two-thirds majority at certain stages, it never attempted to change the Constitution. And it is unlikely that any party in South Africa, if the current ruling party loses its power, would attempt to change that constitution in any substantial way. A second element that is not going to change is the eradication of apartheid. Having come out of 350 years of racial discrimination, there's no mainstream party in South Africa that wants to go back to that system, which oppressed 80% of the population of South Africa. So I think that's off the table. A third element, which is linked to the second element, which is unlikely to change, is putting in place policies and principles to equalize people's opportunities. In other words, to make up for the discrimination of the past. Programs of affirmative action and so on, which are contested at home, but no one actually believes that we don't need some way to bridge the gap between the past discrimination and a future based on equality. I also think South Africa's engagement with the world in international relations, based on an idea that we need to change the global institutions to reflect the reality of both the developed world and the developing world, are common cause among all the parties in South Africa. In other words, the old situation of the first world versus the third world does not apply in South Africa's policies. We believe that the whole world needs to be uplifted, and the way you do that is by reforming both the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, to reflect the realities of the world as it is today, not the world as it was in 1945. And I think that is also a common cause in South Africa.
How is the current relationship between the press and the government?
Not very good, actually, in South Africa, but I guess in Argentina it's something similar. I don't think any government in the world enjoys a very vibrant free media, because the media looks for things that don't necessarily please the government, and the opposite of that, of course. So I would say that there's quite a contest in South Africa, because we have a free press established by constitutional right, but the governing party, of which I'm not a member, I come from the opposition in South Africa, is now talking about setting up a media tribunal and doing various things to perhaps restrict the press in South Africa. Now, that's just a debate that's happening in South Africa right now, but any move or law has to meet the requirements of the Constitution, which I mentioned earlier. In other words, Parliament or the President doesn't have the power to pass any law they want. The law has to conform to the constitutional principle, which establishes freedom of expression and therefore freedom of the press. So I don't know how this is going to end up, the current dispute between the government and the press. I also can't say how it's going to end in Argentina, where I know there's a big dispute between the government and the press. And I think many countries in the world, you find tensions between the government authority and the media. That's in the nature of a democracy. So while there might be some aggression at the moment, I don't think anything's going to fundamentally change, and nor should it, because after all, a critical media is essential for the operations of a true democracy.
What's your country's position with respect to nuclear energy?
Well, let me say first of all that South Africa had nuclear weapons under apartheid. It acquired nuclear capability, and its nuclear arsenal was decommissioned under international supervision by the last white president of South Africa, F.W. de Klerk, in 1991. So we're one of the very few countries in the world that had nuclear weapons and then decommissioned them. So I think South Africa is in a very good place and space in respect of nuclear energy. But the issue of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation has always been part of South Africa's foreign policy engagements. and we support wholeheartedly the work of the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, as the competent and legitimate forum on issues relating to nuclear energy. South Africa continues to pronounce itself on all matters within that forum and believes, first of all, that states do have a legitimate right for nuclear energy provided, and this is an important proviso, it is used for peaceful purposes. And therefore we are fully in support of the Non-Proliferation Treaty as well as its universality. In other words, it should apply to everyone. No state should be exempted from its provisions. And we believe that nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation are inextricably linked, and therefore we believe in the continuous progress of both these instruments.